They said it would be simple, just a reading, a formality. The lawyer had connected remotely some technical issue with travel, and the rest of us gathered in the living room like it was a casual Sunday. My brother Brian sank into Dad's recliner like he already owned it. Mom stood with her arms folded, her lips tight. Dad William Carter, the man who hadn't smiled at me since I was 12, sat straight-backed in his chair, as if posture would somehow make the numbers sound nobler. I stood not because there weren't enough seats, but because I didn't want to sit in a room where my name was already being erased. When the lawyer began, I kept waiting for Thee and Emily. He listed the assets like grocery items, house, farmland, stocks, retirement accounts. Every line ended with Brian's name. Not even a pause between items, not even a comma with my name beside his. And then, just like that, the lawyer said he'd send over the documents and logged off. That was it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just asked calmly, was there a reason? And before my question even settled into the silence, my father stood and slapped me. Hard. Right across the face. A flat, practiced motion, like he'd waited for the opportunity. My head jerked sideways, but I didn't step back. I didn't touch my cheek. I just looked at him. You're lucky we let you stay this long, he said, low and clear. She's being dramatic. Mom snapped her voice sharper than the slap. He's the son. It's his birthright. Then after a breath, her mouth curled. You're just a girl. Be grateful we didn't leave you with nothing. I caught Brian's smirk. That lazy, slow grin he always wore when someone else was being humiliated. He didn't speak. He never had to. He'd grown up knowing the world would tilt to accommodate him, and in this house it always had. Speak again, my mother added, and you're out of this family. So I didn't speak. I stood there staring at the three people who had spent years demanding my silence and now feared what it might say. The sting on my cheek was real, but it wasn't the kind that lingers. It was the kind that clarified. That slap didn't bruise. It settled something. It confirmed what I had suspected for years, but had never dared to name. I wasn't ever part of the plan. I was a piece of furniture they forgot wasn't bolted down. But now I was moving, quietly, and they had no idea what I would do next. I used to think my name would show up eventually, somewhere on something that mattered, a college brochure, a thank you card, a title deed. But it never did. In our family, names weren't earned by effort, they were assigned by gender, and I had the wrong one. Growing up in the Carter house, things had their order. Dad gave orders, Mom enforced them, and Brian, my older brother by 2 years, lived like a guest in a hotel that bent to his moods. I was not invited into the hierarchy. I existed underneath it like floorboards, always present, always expected to hold weight, never noticed until I cracked. At 9, I learned how to iron dress shirts properly. Brian's collar had to sit flat. At 10, I memorized Dad's coffee preferences. Dark roast splash of cream mug, warmed first. I learned not because anyone taught me, but because mistakes were punished in silence. Forgetting meant disappointment. Remembering meant survival. Mom used to say, girls keep the house running. That's just how it is. She didn't say it cruelly. She said it like it was gravity. I was expected to fold towels while Brian played outside, to wash dishes while he got extra portions. If he forgot his backpack, I was the one scolded. If he skipped chores, I was told to cover for him. You're more responsible, they'd say. You're the girl. There was no birthday where I got the full candle count. No school award that didn't somehow circle back to Brian's potential. When I made the honor roll in 8th grade, Mom said, good. Maybe Brian will follow your example. He never did, but he never had to. He was the son. That was the achievement. I wasn't lazy. I didn't rebel. I thought if I leaned into their system, maybe it would shift. Maybe they'd see that I was the one holding the rope, not just pulling it. I remember being 16 and using my part-time paycheck to fix the laundry machine because Dad didn't want to call anyone. I never got reimbursed. I barely got a thank you. But I didn't complain. I told myself that one day the scales would balance. They didn't. By college, I was commuting from home while Brian stayed on campus despite being only 20 minutes away. They said he needed space to grow. I asked for help with books. They said that's what scholarships are for. Brian didn't keep his grades, but they covered his housing anyway. Boys take longer to mature, Mom said, like it was a scripture. I started keeping receipts, not literal ones, but memories. Brian's forgotten dentist appointments I rescheduled. Dad's tax forms I printed. Mom's medication I tracked. None of it was acknowledged. At Thanksgiving, I cooked while Brian watched football. At Christmas, I wrapped everyone's gifts, including the ones they handed me still in the store bag. My name wasn't on the gift tags, I wrote it in pen myself. I began to understand that I wasn't just underappreciated, I was systematically unseen. My value was functional. If the house was clean, if meals were on the table, if Brian made it to work on time, it was assumed. And if anything fell apart, I was the variable. Dad used to say, respect isn't given, it's earned. But in our house, respect was coded mail. Obedience was expected from me. Correction was delivered without warmth. When I was 15 and asked why Brian didn't have to clean his own bathroom, Dad stared like I'd spat on the family crest. "You're not here to argue, Emily," he said. "You're here to contribute." That word contribute became a leash. It meant be quiet, be useful, and don't forget why we let you stay. Still, I kept trying. I thought if I graduate early, maybe they'll see me. If I get promoted at work, maybe they'll mention it. But milestones passed like shadows under a closed door. The only time I heard my name was when something was missing: the remote, the milk, the charger Brian borrowed and lost. And I gave it all, even when I shouldn't have. There was a time I drove Brian home from a bar after midnight because he didn't want Mom to know he'd been drinking. I covered for him, always. Not because I liked him, but because I thought keeping the peace was my job. I thought if I kept the threads tied tight enough, the house wouldn't fall apart. I didn't realize I was the thread. It took me years to see that I was raised not for love, but for silence, to smooth over what was broken, to disappear under what was needed. And I told myself that maybe, just maybe, when the time came, when Dad got old, when decisions had to be made, they'd remember I was the one who always showed up. But then came the will reading. And there was no mention, no gratitude, just a slap. A sharp, simple punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't pack. I just left. My cheek still tingled from the slap, but the real mark wasn't on my skin. It was somewhere deeper in a place I hadn't let them reach before, a place I hadn't even known I still had. I grabbed my backpack, the one I used for work and errands, shoved in a charger, my ID, a hoodie, and the one thing I hadn't touched in years, my notebook. The same one I used to hide between cookbooks in the kitchen, the one with receipts I was never allowed to show. Nancy Reynolds was the only person I knew would answer the door without asking why I was there. She was my godmother, Dad's cousin technically, but long removed from family politics. They called her soft because she never married and liked quiet evenings and poetry books. I always thought she was the only person in my life who didn't need me to prove anything. She opened the door in slippers and didn't blink when she saw my face. "You staying a while?" she asked. I nodded. She stepped aside. That first night, I slept on a fold-out cushion in her sewing room. My back hurt, the floor creaked, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake up to a chore. No breakfast to prep, no trash to take out, no calendar to update. Just the morning light and the sound of birds and my breath. On the second day, I opened the notebook. The first page was from 2 years ago, Brian's graduation party. I'd cooked for 47 guests, cleaned the garage, decorated, ordered a cake. My name wasn't on the card. That entry was just the beginning. I flipped forward every dental appointment I scheduled, every broken appliance I paid to fix every shopping list every day. I stayed home sick, but still folded laundry. I didn't make the list for revenge. Not yet. I made it to remember. Because the more I wrote, the more I realized how deeply I had forgotten my own life. Not the events, but the fact that they happened to me. That I was there. That I gave and gave and gave without witness. By the end of the week, the list had tripled. I scanned everything into a digital folder. I labeled it unpaid labor. Then I began the second phase, not emotional, just logistical. I filed paperwork to revoke their access to my student records, insurance, and bank information. They had signed as guardians years ago to help with paperwork. I had forgotten how many things they still had access to. That was on me. I fixed it. Nancy signed as my witness for financial independence. I got a new debit card, transferred my savings, changed the password on my email. I wasn't scared. I wasn't shaking. I was calm, like someone replacing cracked tiles on a kitchen floor. No rush, just quiet repairs. I didn't tell anyone where I was not because I wanted to disappear, but because I wanted to see how long it would take for them to notice I was gone. Not out of cruelty, but curiosity. When you remove a system from a house, how long does it take before the silence echoes? I didn't scan the bruises from the slap for police. I wasn't trying to build a case. I just needed to have them on record. For myself. So when the voice in my head whispered, maybe it wasn't that bad, I'd have something to hold in my hand and say, no, it happened. And you walked away. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't need to. There was power in leaving the door open and watching no one walk through. Each day passed like a clean line. Nancy gave me space, a corner of the kitchen for my mug, a drawer in the bathroom for my toothbrush. She didn't ask questions. Just made tea and sat beside me when I felt quiet. The only thing she said that stuck with me was this: some families raise children. Some raise servants. The hardest part is realizing which one you were. I nodded. I didn't cry. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing ever does. But 3 weeks after I left, the first crack showed itself in the quietest way. Nancy came in from the grocery store, her canvas bag slung over one arm, and said almost offhand, "Saw your mother at Fairway." She asked the clerk to help her bag things, said her back was acting up. Then, after a pause, she added, "She looked overwhelmed, not hurt, just like she couldn't remember how to move without someone telling her what came next." I didn't reply. I just folded the towel in my lap and nodded. That night, I opened the notebook again and started a new page. At the top, I wrote, "What they lose without me." The first entry was small. Mom forgot how to pack groceries. But the list grew quickly. 2 days later, I got a text from a neighbor's daughter. She worked part-time at the laundromat near our old neighborhood. The message just said your brother was here. Had his clothes in a trash bag. Looked like he'd never done laundry before. I didn't ask for a photo, but she sent one anyway. Brian, standing by a broken dryer, arms crossed his face, twisted in frustration. A week after that, Nancy heard from someone at her church that Dad had shown up late to 3 meetings in a row. One client had walked out. He'd snapped at an assistant over a misfiled document and HR had pulled him aside. I could almost picture it, Dad trying to explain himself, realizing too late that no one had reminded him to set the alarm, print the agenda, or iron his shirt. I never said a word, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It had weight, density. They were hearing it now, even if they didn't understand what it meant. Then came the messages. The first was from Mom. "No greeting. Just Brian has an awards dinner Friday. None of his suits are ironed. You need to stop being ridiculous and come home." No, how are you? No apology, just the same voice, same assumption that I was still orbiting their needs. I didn't answer. 4 days later, another one, this time from Dad. "This is childish. No one will tolerate this kind of behavior in the real world. Come home. Apologize. You can earn your place again." I read that one twice. Earn it. That was the word. As if I hadn't already. As if I hadn't paid my dues in hours and bruises and dinners reheated at midnight. I didn't respond. I took screenshots not for evidence but for myself, so I wouldn't forget who they were when they thought no one was watching. By then, I had enrolled in a local nursing program, community college, evening classes. Nancy had cleared a corner in the guest room for my textbooks. I studied late, packed my own lunches, folded only my own laundry. It was hard, but real, and quiet, and mine. Meanwhile, the stories kept trickling in. Brian started skipping work. One of his teachers reached out twice, no reply from home. Mom told the church she was recovering from a mobility issue, though no one had seen her in physical therapy. They told people I'd gone away for an internship, that I was pursuing maturity. Funny how they only praised that word when it fit the lie. I didn't correct them. I didn't write a letter. I didn't post anything. I just kept building a life where no one asked me to disappear. Then came the box. I'd been gathering things old chore lists, the birthday card Mom once gave me that read, "We didn't plan for you, but God has a purpose." A cracked locket she gave me at 13, engraved, "So you remember we didn't have to keep you." I printed the ledger, 52 pages, bound it labeled "The Front Unpaid Labor." Years 1026, no note, no return address. Just the truth packed, neatly sent to the only place that ever treated me like I wasn't enough. Nancy dropped it off at dawn. 2 days later, her friend called. "They didn't come out for hours," she said. Then your dad opened the box. He looked pale. He just stood there. That was enough. I didn't need to see their faces. I didn't need the apology. I wasn't looking for a fight. I'd taken everything they once demanded, my usefulness, my silence, my presence, and returned it in the only language they'd understand. Documentation. I moved into a studio apartment 2 blocks from campus. 1 window creaky floor kitchen the size of a closet. The shower ran either too hot or too cold, but it was mine. I painted the walls a pale color I liked. I kept my books stacked in old milk crates. I worked part-time at a bookstore and studied in the evenings. Every Friday, I lit a candle, not for prayer, not for memory, just because I could. No one barked orders. No one asked if I'd remembered to pack someone else's lunch. No one handed me their mess and called it love. I folded only my clothes. I bought only my groceries. I set the thermostat to my liking. I lived quietly, and the world didn't collapse. Still, the updates found me as they always do. A girl from Nancy's church messaged me Dad passed out in the grocery store. They said it was stress. No further detail. Just a headline dropped in my lap. Brian was seen at a job fair yelling at a volunteer because his resume had a crease. Mom had joined an online group called Parents of Ungrateful Children. One of her posts had the title, "When They Forget Who Fed Them." I didn't comment. I didn't react. I had nothing left to offer. They hadn't changed. They'd simply collapsed inward, angry at the vacuum I left behind, but never brave enough to name it. One afternoon, a letter came in the mail. Not typed, not formal, handwritten on thick cream stationery I recognized. My mother's handwriting slanted and neat. "We miss you," it read. "It's not the same. Brian's been struggling. Maybe it's time we talk." No apology. No reflection. Just the familiar loop. "Brian is uncomfortable, therefore you must return." I folded the letter once, placed it in the back of a drawer next to the photograph of the slap one I'd scanned but never printed until now. Not to revisit the pain. Just to remember that it happened. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Some nights I wondered what they told people now, what version they clung to. Maybe I'd gone off the rails. Maybe I was finding myself. It didn't matter. The truth had never been welcome in that house. What mattered was that I no longer needed their shame to explain me. I no longer needed their silence to hurt. I had found something steadier than anger. Peace. Not the kind that wraps you in warmth. Not forgiveness. Not a soft memory. Just the absence of war. They taught me to serve. So I left them to collapse without me. They trained me to be silent. So I made my silence the sentence they now serve. They called me worthless. And I gave them exactly that. Nothing. Not a scream. Not a plea. Not a single thread of my new life. I didn't burn their house down. I just took the warmth with me. And now, when they sit in the cold silence of what used to be control, they'll finally understand what I was worth. Because revenge isn't the fire they expect. Sometimes it's the echo of footsteps walking away and never coming back.